Welcome to another episode of AI Entanglement. This is a podcast made by LunaGen. I am Prem Talreja, the CEO of LunaGen, and we make these podcasts to basically explore how AI is entangling with humans and all our endeavors, and we call it AI Entanglement. Today, we are going to push the envelope even further because we're going to look at the intersection of AI and outer space exploration. So this is two very massive new boundaries, and we'll see what we can cover in this brief podcast. My guest today is a planetary scientist, Dr. Pascal Lee, and I have known him for some time. I've heard him talk, and I've just been so impressed by his knowledge and how he makes it relatable to many of us. But today we're going to push it a little further into the AI domain. But Dr. Lee is a PhD from Cornell. He is a planetary scientist at SETI Institute, Search for Extraterrestrial Life. He's a director of NASA Haughton-Mars Project, specifically around Mars, and director of Mars Institute. He's also a professor at Kepler Space University, as chief scientist at Ceres Robotics, and a VP of planetary development at National Space Society. So amazing experience and influence on the Mars industry. His current focus is on Mars, which is not the moon, but now about our endeavor to get to Mars. But this becomes very interesting time because we can talk about just having done Artemis 2 trip to the moon, but now we can see how we're advancing on Mars. But I have to say one more thing before I introduce or start asking Pascal, is that he is also an amazing artist. He uses his time, especially during COVID, he started to use that time to draw art, acrylic or oil. Amazing picture art of humans on Mars or Mars landers and all that available to purchase, but at the same time, great collection he has. So welcome, Pascal, Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Prem. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. And I love your idea of this entanglement programs.
Coming to the subject of AI, I will say that you've been involved in this kind of technological forefront for some time. When did you think that AI is going to become so prevalent that it becomes a weapon or a tool or a technology in the current time? Or has it become like that?
Yeah.
In this research book. So what was the journey of AI?
I'm not an AI researcher.
Yes.
Which means that my perspective on AI is largely based on, what I learn along with the general public about AI, in our day-to-day lives. But what I can say is that, for decades in the past, AI seemed to be over-promising. One day we will have this, one day we will do that. Just like with robotics, one day robots will be doing this and that. And sure, I believed in that future, but I sort of saw it much farther out. And this future suddenly, I think, is catching up with us. So it took me personally a little bit by surprise, but probably not for people who are, the engineers behind AI in our society. But I think in the last 2 years, it's become clear that AI is here and robotics is making incredible strides. And I think the two combined with the two combined AI and robotics advancements, and then that combined with our desire to create essentially an artificial human, which oddly is not necessarily the best robot you can create for different applications, but somehow everybody wants to create an android because it's like something you have to get out of your system, or maybe gives you the sense that you are creating something divine. Essentially, you're creating an object in your own image, that behaves like you. Anyway, we are close to being there, right? We are seeing our society getting ready to admit into its inner sanctums, into people's homes, android robots as assistants. And these machines are incredible in several ways, but one of them is that they have the physical attributes of a human. And the second thing is that they have the intellectual attributes of a human. Of course, some will argue that, well, they're still not being very creative, or they still don't have conscience or feelings or emotions. They're just subroutines, essentially, endowing mechanisms. The truth is, why do we want to send people in space, right? Why do we want to send humans one day to Mars? Obviously, we want to send the best people we have to explore these places. But there's definitely a whole dimension of us saying that we need to go because it inspires us. It's a part of us that is going to the moon or going to Mars through these astronauts. And in the future, more and more people could have a chance to go. So all of this is sort of a call for the adventure, for the inspiration. And when we analyze, the difference today between humans and robots, like, Perseverance is roving around on Mars. Curiosity is still roving around on Mars. Not so
Yep.
long ago, we had Opportunity and Spirit roaming around on Mars. We gave these robots even nicknames like Opie and Percy, to sort of humanize them, but they were not humans. We never really thought of them as ourselves. We treated those essentially as strictly machines in
Yeah.
contrast to us biological humans. But I'm arguing now in meetings that we're entering an age where we will get to android humans endowed with artificial general intelligence, let alone ASI, artificial superintelligence,
Mhm.
who will be, for all intents and purposes, machines that we relate to as if they were humans.
Yeah.
I mean, Star Trek The Next Generation had this character called Data,
Yes.
who sometimes was sick, in other words, broken, sometimes needed repair or
Yeah.
okay. We sympathized for him. We cared about this character. We liked him.
Yes.
In fact, we wanted him to succeed. So my point here is that the rapport we have with robots is really evolving as these androids come into the scene. And I'm arguing that we will no longer feel the same drive to send biological humans in space if we can actually send android humans who, essentially behave like humans and then do so much more. I mean, an android astronaut would not need to be fed, does not need to drink,
Does not have to be brought back.
does not have to be brought back. It does not have to be,
Mm.
doesn't produce waste that you have
Yeah.
to dispose of and process.
Yeah.
It doesn't breathe. It just has to be recharged. And there's plenty of solar power and other power out there that we can.
Yes, it does. I mean, host of questions come up, and that's on Earth as well. I mean, we realize that they can work 24/7. They can work, in ways that we are sometimes not able to do, but they can also be subordinated to us
Yep.
and get a lot of work done. So, in that sense, you could say that, like analogy of automation, cars, and things like that, we can see that how much more navigation, diagnosing the problem, or dealing with even survival issues of braking and steering and all that stuff. You've spent a lot of time, when I recall talking to you, about understanding the lunar or the Martian surface from the point of view of looking for surfaces like that in the on Earth, somewhere in Canada, and you had said some volcanic sites in Oregon and places like that. So using that analog in the Arctic or on the Earth, what human weaknesses or worries you were trying to uncover about Mars or Moon in terms of technology and psychological barriers that we humans and machines are going to have
Yeah.
to uncover,
Yep.
particularly with Mars.
So we've been working on a variety of projects in terrestrial locations that are similar in important ways to the moon or to Mars or both sometimes. And we've also been looking into, of course, how humans will operate and their activities be optimized in these settings. And of course, also looking at some psychological issues, etc. But the bottom line is, the moon is much more accessible than Mars is. And that's not to say that the moon is easy, but it's just to say that Mars is really more difficult than most people think or realize. Mars is 1,000 times farther from the Earth than the moon is when it's
Yeah.
farthest from the Earth. Mars is not 3 days away from the Earth. It's about 6 months for now. And once we get to nuclear thermal propulsion, it will be down to maybe 3 months, but it's still going to be months away. So our whole strategy for exploring Mars and the way humans will be involved in that will have to be radically different. On the moon, we will still have, you cannot escape essentially a lot of input from the Earth in real time, so to speak, even though it's a 1.5 second light time delay each way. But on Mars, you essentially need to be extremely autonomous, not just as a human crew, but have planning tools, vehicles, robotic assistants. All of these will have to have an incredible degree of autonomy to be really, helpful to you. The other thing, of course, is that there's a lot more at stake, I think, scientifically to being on Mars eventually than there is on the moon. The moon is super interesting scientifically. It tells us a lot about not just the moon itself, but the evolution of the Earth-Moon system. But Mars is about trying to find the first example of an alien form of life. And of course, we're not talking about people. We're talking about microscopic forms of life. But it's
Mhm.
still absolutely conceivable scientifically that there could be life on Mars that is not of the Earth, that is completely separate from life on Earth.
Correct.
We now know, of course, that all life on Earth shares a common origin. We all use DNA, all life forms on Earth, in one way or another. We also use the same set of amino acids to make all our proteins, which is quite extraordinary when you think about, how much life is reliant on the creation and production of proteins. All proteins in Earth life uses the same set of 20 to sometimes 22 amino acid molecules. And not only that, but the left-handed version only of these amino acids. Meanwhile, in nature, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of possible amino acids that are known. It's actually hundreds that are known and suspected that there could be thousands. And life somehow on Earth uses only that select set of 20. You feed life other forms of amino acids, it rejects it or it ignores it royally. So it's quite characteristic of life on Earth. And what we're looking for on Mars is possibly something that would either not use DNA or use a different set of amino acids for its proteins, which means that we have to find it alive, which means that chances of finding it at the surface of Mars is close to zero, which
Yeah.
means that we have to go underground on Mars, either by deep drilling or exploring caves to get
Yeah.
to the bottom of that. But
Yeah.
what's at stake is extraordinary, right? Because if we could find the first example of an alien form of life, that would tell you that life is a universal phenomenon in the universe, that it's not limited to the Earth, that, we're not alone, at least in terms of other life forms. But the implication would be that we're probably not alone in terms of intelligent species either. So this is what's riding, I think, scientifically at the very top of us going to Mars as soon as possible.
Let's jump into the Mars. I mean, we just finished Artemis 2 and we are excited about what return to the moon is going to look like and all the events that are being planned. But just give us, in your opinion, the timeline of now Mars. What is the general timeline of what is happening and when will we see activities on Mars, landing machines and then humans?
For a while in recent times, we've been pushing both. We meaning even NASA. But then as things got more real with Artemis, especially with the recent mission and the new administrator, the focus is squarely on the moon. But to the point where even SpaceX, which is a company that has as a goal to put humans on Mars and establish a permanent presence for humans on Mars, SpaceX is also focusing on what's happening on the lunar front for now. So that's not to say that Mars is left behind. I myself actually do quite a bit of work on the moon in the context of supporting Artemis, but also just general lunar science. So the moon is going to be what occupies us and probably what feeds us, so to speak, through NASA for the next few years because of the intensity of focus on the moon. But Mars remains it's a different goal. But it's a destination beyond the moon. And as much as I think that us establishing a foothold and a permanent presence on the moon is absolutely the right thing to do and what we should focus on for now, planning for Mars is a long lead time endeavor. And
Yeah.
so planning for Mars is also taking place now. In fact, it's been taking place for several decades. But if you're asking me when will humans go to Mars, well, this is actually going to be something that is very relevant to our topic today, right? Because we are seeing the emergence of AI and the incredible development in robotics as well. So, but my guess is this is not going to be this decade, Mars. It's going to be in the 2040s.
Gotcha. I think that you can say that what will be the role of humans
Yes.
with respect to this? Because there is something, well, I'm a huge fan of going to Mars as for humans, not for, I would love to if I was selected. But the point is that nothing can replace that human experience to some degree. Although, I don't know, is it data that will just be enough?
Yeah, well, you see, that's the thing. If you start relating to these astronaut robots that you send to space, they're now more than just machines to collect data for you, right?
Mm.
You might actually care for them. You will grow an affection for them, just like you cared for Data, the character in Star Trek. I mean, not to mention that we can now anticipate being able to create android robots in our own image. So, I mean, I hope to see the day where I might have an immortal version of myself in some sense. I
Immortal.
mean,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
serves the ego in an insane way, but at the same time, I wish I could teach it what I know about Mars, and
Yeah.
that it could learn everything else that I don't know, which is much more, of course, about the
Yeah.
moon and Mars, and then have that person go, have that entity go.
Yeah.
In some sense, I will feel like I'm going. Actually,
Yeah.
we're going to think of these robots as our own offspring, as opposed to our own, products or machines.
That's an amazing
And
idea that you just brought up. If they are in our image, then they're offsprings.
yeah, I mean,
They're a
the
proxy for us going there.
they can have our voices, and in fact they'll be on Mars, like you said, forever, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can, I think, yeah, you won't have the very few people, I think, ultimately will have the biological adventure of actually going to Mars
Yeah.
and enjoying the place. It will still happen, and we want that. But and then of course wait till the competition does it. In other words, even if you were saying, okay, well, no, going to space is still going to be the purview of biological humans. No android will ever replace a human beings. This and that in space. But wait till China sends an army of androids to space and starts doing
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
Then you're going to feel like, okay, wait a minute, they now have a cheap way of conquering the whole solar system, and then we're not going to be left behind. So I see
Yes.
a race actually to occupy the solar system with android robots and
Right.
robotic
Right.
entities that represent our
Interesting.
presence.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a war of attrition. It's also issue of, even now we talk about the imbalance in how war is being conducted with drones versus, massive.
Yes.
So I think that's all coming into play much faster than we had imagined. I think in our wildest imaginations, we thought this would happen anyway, but now it's happening much faster. How is it affecting your work when you're looking at the surfaces and the Arctic landscapes for human use, or now? So is that impacting how you are looking at what equipment do we have to have for Android to be there and do the
Yeah.
work that we humans would be doing in parallel or without us?
It's impacting it in a big way as soon as you start thinking about specifics.
Mm,
So let's take, for example, the spacesuit. All right.
mm.
I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of people
Oh,
say,
yeah.
well, why don't we go to Mars now? We could. It's just a matter of will and throwing some money at it. It's not quite true. I mean, there are really lots of things to still work out. For example, the spacesuit. All right. So if you go to Mars, the number one thing you want to be able to do is walk around on the outside, if only to collect samples, but to sort of experience the Martian environment, to explore the place. Now, the spacesuit that we have currently weighs on Earth 300 pounds. That's the spacesuit we use on the space station and that we used before on the space shuttle. 300 pounds is what it weighs on the Earth.
Yeah.
If you take that suit to the moon, where gravity is 6 times less than on the Earth, 300 pounds divided by six, your spacesuit has a felt weight of 50 pounds. So
Still
that's
manageable.
heavy, but you
Mm,
can do field work with that.
mhm.
And in fact, during the Apollo program, the spacesuit weighed actually less than 300 pounds. It weighed about 220 pounds.
Mm,
And that's because it had fewer redundancies. It
mm.
was a higher risk spacesuit, so it was lighter overall because of that. But the astronauts had a felt weight for the spacesuit of 200 pounds or so divided by six, which was
Yeah.
you know, 30 pounds or so felt weight,
Yeah.
35 pounds. So field work on Apollo was quite pleasant and doable. But
Yeah.
you take this current 300-pound spacesuit to Mars, where gravity is not 17% of the Earth, like on the moon, but 38% of the gravity on Earth. The felt weight of your spacesuit is 125 pounds. You can't do much with that. I mean, I know that some Marine backpackers in the Marines, okay, or special forces can carry something like that for half a day, but it's not a good way to do field work, where you have to climb and collect rocks, and it's just
A
very
whole
difficult.
new redesign, different design has to be thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, so the way we actually have come up with a new design for that is to, yes, number one, reduce the mass of the spacesuit by better materials, this and that. But the other thing is to offload from the spacesuit some of its most heavy elements, like the oxygen tanks, the water tanks to cool your spacesuit on the inside, the batteries. You don't offload them completely, of course. You have a suit that has maybe 1 or 2 hours of autonomy instead of 8 to 10 hours. But you put those extra reserves on an ATV, on a rover, on a vehicle. So while you're riding
So it's
around, you
local,
recharge.
local at the site. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
while you're riding around, you recharge your spacesuit, and then when you need to stop and pick up some rocks or move around, you step off of your ATV. But then it's a smart ATV. It's a smart all-terrain vehicle. It's a smart ATV, and it follows you. I mean, we can do that now, right? Cars that we have suitcases in airports that follow their
Yeah.
owners, so
Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can have an ATV that follows the
Yeah.
astronaut,
Yeah.
so that your supplies are never far away from you. Okay.
Correct.
Your, okay. But right there, you can see how on the moon, the exploration unit is sort of the human in his or her spacesuit, whereas on Mars, the exploration unit is the human, the spacesuit, and the ATV, the robotic
Yeah.
vehicle
Yeah.
that on wheels that supports the human,
Yeah.
and is not just a means of transportation, but it's also a mobile life support system, and it's also a robotic assistant. So how we envision the future exploration of Mars and the role of AI and robotics is already pervading our current planning. But
Hmm.
imagine that we had just android astronauts mostly. Well, now, we would put them in a spacesuit only if we really could not manage thermal control,
Correct.
and we needed
Yes.
to sort of create a nice temperature environment for them. But otherwise, they would not need anything like a life support system.
Right. Right. Right.
They would just have to recharge every now and then. And
Yeah.
so that completely changes
So,
your science, your exploration operations, your risk as well is
yeah.
completely bought down.
So, Pascal, just to interrupt you, so was it like in the last few years, you guys had to come back to a meeting and say, look, we have to rethink this
Oh yes,
challenge
yes,
because on a scientific line of thinking, we just want to reach Mars and do these discoveries in Mars. So it's not like we are disappointed if we can't send humans. If anything, we could be elated that we are not putting humans at danger, but we are able to probe that far out into the space. So rethinking of that, is that
yes,
a good way
yes.
to put it? Yeah.
Absolutely. For the past year and a half, actually, I was a member of a steering committee at the National Academy of Sciences
Mm.
to think about what science should humans do. And one of the four recommendations, one of the four big recommendations that this committee came up with is that from here on, we really have to have the people who are planning human missions to Mars, including the scientists, including the engineers and the managers, stay abreast of what's going on in the AI world and the human
Yeah.
agent teaming.
Mm. Yeah.
And when you are in a position to go is going to possibly alter how you what technologies have matured by then for you to be able to
To
use them
accomplish those goals. Yeah,
in your mission.
exactly. So in that sense, the it could be that the cost of using AI based technology could reduce the cost of what we're trying to achieve because of the issues you mentioned about
Yeah.
preserving human life and even bringing them back. I mean, in a sense, you're saying it's a one-way journey.
Yeah, I mean, for you could bring one robot back to end up at the Smithsonian because it's
Mm.
worth
Yeah, right. It's been
preserving
there.
them.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, if your robot has a way of fixing itself even and
Yeah,
getting upgrades to its
yeah,
mind,
yeah,
and it's usable for decades
yeah,
past,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but so, of course, in our current technology and robotics and AI and all the layers of software we always talk in terms of latency. What is the latency of getting a response back from an LLM, when you write a prompt? So there's a latency issue that comes up all the time and say, well, if it's going to take too much time. But in terms of that fundamental issue of latency in communicating with an entity or a device on Mars or human on Mars, that's a pretty significant time lapse.
Yes, well, you bring up a very good point. First of all, right now we really feel the brunt of the latency when we
Yeah.
try to communicate with Curiosity or Perseverance. It takes, depending on where Mars is in relation to us and the sun, it takes anywhere from 3.5 minutes to 22 minutes for one-way signal to get between the two, Earth and
Mm.
Mars. All right, but the real
I'm
bottleneck,
sorry, I missed that. How much time?
3.5 minutes when Mars is closest to the Earth to 22 minutes each way, one
Oh
way.
my God. Yeah.
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 So you say hello from Earth. Mars gets it 22 minutes later at worst. And then
Right.
if they respond, you get the answer 44 minutes after you've sent the hello. Yeah.
Right. Right. Right.
But the real bottleneck anyway right now is not even that time latency. It's the science team digesting the latest download of data from Mars and figuring out what the next plan of action is and uploading
Mm,
the commands for the next move. So it's, teleoperating robots by humans, if the robots are not very clever themselves, is a very time consuming thing. And the latency, the time delay between the Earth and Mars is just compounding the issue, but it's not even the main source of the delay.
mm,
It's more like the decision making delay from the science team that's the
correct.
real delay. But once you have autonomous systems that are intelligent on site, well, now, yeah, you will upload some upgrades to their brains, but you are essentially trusting them to make good decisions on site, including scientific decisions.
Right.
And they will
Right.
be sharing their results, and you'll have a constant stream actually of what they're thinking and doing
Yeah.
coming back
Yeah.
to you. And then, yeah, you'll find out what they're thinking with 22 minutes of delay, but you don't necessarily need to provide uplink and
Yeah.
input
Yeah.
as
Meanwhile, work goes on. Yeah.
meanwhile works goes on. Exactly.
Yeah. Which kind of leads to this thought I had in my mind about the fact that in terms of reaching Mars, the challenge is one is the propulsion, how to reduce the time of getting there, the engineering effort for humans, or with AI, how does that change? Or is there still a building a trust between an machine and a human?
I mean, the big change is, the distance to Mars is what drives the time of travel and, of course, our propulsion capabilities. Okay. But the cost of going to Mars and the mass that you have to send is really driven by the fact that you have humans to keep alive. You
Oh,
have to
yes.
carry the food, not just for the trip, but for the stay on Mars and coming back. You have to travel, take the oxygen with you and the water. And even if you recycle the water, you still want to get most of your water with you up front in case the recycling doesn't work. So the cost of keeping humans alive is what is really driving the cost of a human mission to Mars. But if you're now sending just robots, any country almost, if they can send something to escape the Earth on a rocket, could send an android robot to Mars and land it. So all of a sudden you have much cheaper access to Mars. But of course, I'm not suggesting the robots, the androids we have now are ready for that. They have
Yeah.
to be ruggedized, they have to be
Yeah.
radiation hardened, at least their
Yeah.
chips.
Mm,
They have to be temperature rated for the
yeah.
cold on Mars. They have to survive
Yeah.
the Martian night. Which is why this notion of putting an android in a spacesuit, which has come up in discussions I've had with NASA Ames recently, is sort of an interesting concept because you might be able to do that much sooner than having to develop a robot that can survive
Much sooner or even more frequent.
more frequently. Exactly.
You can send a series of them out
Yeah.
there and see
Yeah.
you get redundancy and all that stuff. Well, yeah, those are all very, very likely scenarios. But just another question would be that how is this NASA and space and all this work that you're involved in, how has that helped AI? Or how will space help AI?
You know, space uses AI. We use AI in the analysis of large data sets, for example, that we already have. And so AI is already used commonly
Hmm.
at NASA and the space program to analyze data. AI is used commonly to optimize, in specialized ways what engineers are doing in their designs and okay. But I think what is sort of new is the integrated AI and robotics approach, which is really potentially changing how we should think about future humans. I mean, even SpaceX and Elon have proposed to send Optimus, the Tesla android, to Mars on the early missions. But Elon still has in mind, a city of 1 million humans, biological humans on Mars. I actually don't see that ever happening. On the other hand, I see some sort of a bit like a city, if you want to call that, but it's more like an android world where androids have essentially built stuff and continue to maintain things, and humans in relatively few numbers come and visit and enjoy the experience. Either as scientists or as tourists, and you have to be either extremely wealthy or extremely lucky. If you win the lotto, it's a bit like in Total Recall, you get to go to Mars if you win
Yeah.
the lotto. So I don't see Mars as being able to sustain a city of 100 of a million biological humans
Yeah.
ever. I mean, it would
Well,
just
it could be also said that life would have to be very terrible on Earth for that
yes.
many
Well, that's
people to go
yeah.
there. Why would you bother? You may not even exist by that time,
Well, that's the other argument. Yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
often hear that we need to go there because we need to be a
Survival.
multi-planet species because it's an insurance policy for life on Earth. You never know what could happen to the Earth, so we should have humanity established on
Yeah.
Mars.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think, I mean, no amount of asteroid catastrophic impact combined with global pandemic, combined with global volcanism, combined
Yeah.
with
Right. Thermal, this issues and all
nuclear
that.
war would
Yeah.
make the surface of Mars, of the Earth, less habitable than Mars.
Yeah.
So,
Well said. It would
so
still have oxygen to breathe and water to drink and those kind of things. Yeah.
I think the real reason for going to Mars is to explore, to expand our presence, yes, to become a
Mm.
multi-planet species for that reason,
Yeah.
but not as an insurance policy because something bad could happen to the Earth.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end here on two questions, but one could be is that this kind of could possibly make us think that there could be civilizations outside that are advanced enough, like we are getting to the point with androids, that terrestrial visits to us and things like that are likely or are happening. Right?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. In fact, the progress in AI and robotics, I actually just wrote a short paper on that. The progress of AI and robotics is really changing how we should be thinking about interstellar travel. Interstellar
Yes.
travel is so daunting. I mean, the distances are incredible. If you just think of this, the nearest star to us is Proxima Centauri. It's a small red dwarf. It's located 4.26 light years away from Earth.
Yeah.
The analogy I offer is that if the sun, our sun, was the size of a grapefruit, and we put this grapefruit in San Francisco at the beginning of the Golden Gate Bridge, Pluto would be a tiny pinhead at the distance of the first pillar of the Golden Gate Bridge. The nearest star, Proxima Centauri, at that scale would be a little cherry because it's smaller than the sun, located in Chicago.
My
So
God.
you can see how disproportionate the interstellar distances are compared to solar system distances. So, typically the two solutions for interstellar travel that have been proposed is hibernation. So you keep, but then you have to imagine hibernation systems that operate without flaw for hundreds of years before you get to, a viable star for you to, a viable planet.
Yeah.
Or what they call multi-generational starships, where a first generation of people leave the Earth, but then it's only several generations later that the lucky descendants arrive at a planet that's habitable. Okay. But then you still have the whole issue of the life support system working flawlessly,
Yeah.
for decades to hundreds of years. Artificial intelligence opens an entirely new thing because we could just travel to other stars in the form of our DNA or even RNA and something even more basic than that, and be under the care. I mean, so all that needs to be is refrigerated, and that could be a very small part to keep temperature control for a long time. But have all this be cared for by android robots. So, and by then they would be representatives of humanity. I mean, they would be in our own image, but they're machines basically designed to keep us alive. And once we get to the a pleasant exoplanet, we would be cloned by them, and then start a continued biological evolution on that next planet. So AI and robotics are offering a new perspective, I think, on
Totally
how
new
we.
perspective, and you can go on and on in hypothetical situations, but let me close on this note with you. First of all, thank you very much. This is very enlightening. This may not be the last time we talk on this subject, but I wanted to ask you one thing about your art. Okay, please say something about your art. What inspires you, and has that changed? Because now you're trying to look at the role of AI in your art as well, not developing it, but presence of AI.
My father was an architect, and he was very good at sketching. And I remember trying to learn sketching from just watching him do it. So I grew up having a real love for art and drawing, but I sort of didn't do much of it between my age of 20 and 40. I sort of had to focus on becoming a good scientist, and I'm still working on it. But after that, I think I became driven to paint our future. and I paint mostly the human exploration of Mars, but also space-time travel. I've been compelled to sort of paint our future, maybe born out of frustration that it wasn't happening fast enough. So that's sort of how I
Yeah.
psychoanalyze it. But it's both very satisfying, and indeed, you can actually depict what you imagine the future to be
Yes.
through
Yes.
painting.
Yeah.
I mean, there are more efficient ways of doing this today with AI generated graphics, and but I still like this. I do mostly oil painting. In fact, only oil paintings at
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
point. And I don't know. There's something very satisfying about this. But
Yeah. Yeah.
imagine training an AI android one day to actually paint and create
Mm.
landscapes that don't exist and
Yeah.
are sort of
Right.
randomly occurring to in their minds.
Well, I own a piece of that art, and I look at it every day, and I think very nicely about you. And I'm so glad that we got this opportunity, and I'll certainly stay in touch with you more frequently as things develop. But thank you so much, Pascal, and all the best to you.